Thank you for tuning in to Koppen with Comic. I'm Brian Koppen. We're here with comic Jeanie Kim. Jeanie Kim, how the hell are you?
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And I know I follow you online. You're Jean Kim Comedy on Instagram, and you're so
Yes.
funny that you don't need a Twitter.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, you do a weekly comedy show, and it looks like you've been doing it for a while. It's this the Gladys here. Let me get the perfect name here. The Gladys Comedy Party, and you do that every week. Wow, that's a big booking commitment to book a weekly show.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It is a bit of a commitment, but we were doing the show at the Comic Strip Live in the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the pandemic hit, we moved the show online, and we've been doing it every Wednesday now for the past 6 months.
Wow.
And we're a regular group of comics that perform, have been performing together for the past few years. And in some ways it's become like our lifeline. Everybody really looks forward to it, seeing each other. And then we also get to improve and develop our comedy chops. So it's actually been a lifesaver in some ways.
And that's going to be great for the comic strip, because when comedy opens back up and the occupancy rate moves up, I think comic strip's going to be well positioned because it kept all its regular comics sharp.
Yes, absolutely.
And tell me about your journey a little bit, because I know you came from the Midwest and you went to a big time school for broadcast journalism, but here you are instead. You're kicking ass doing stand-up comedy for years in New York City.
Yes, well, thank you. I actually was born in Seoul, South Korea, moved to Ohio when I was 2 years old.
Wow.
And grew up there, all of my, life until I went to college. So I went to the Ohio State University in my hometown, Columbus, Ohio. And Ohio State is the largest public university in the country, like 55,000 students.
Wow.
Well, including all of their branches. And and I studied broadcast journalism and political science. Thought I was going to become a political correspondent, but then kind of used politics and journalism to go into becoming a political lobbyist. So, I get to still use all my skill sets, and it even comes in handy in stand-up, believe it or not.
Yeah. So first of all, how long did you, are you still New York City or New York State lobbyist, or how long did you do that before you transitioned into making people laugh as part of your night job?
Well, I mean, I moved to New York City 20 years ago, and I tried out stand-up comedy by taking stand-up comedy classes at the American Comedy Institute, at the Comic Strip Live, at Gotham. So I've taken a lot of stand-up comedy classes. And 20 years ago, the landscape for stand-up was a little different than it is now. It wasn't as opening. It wasn't as welcoming, I should say, to women and people of color. So I kind of did it for a year. And then I said, I better go and get a real job because, I didn't have family living here where I could like bum off their couch.
It didn't pay the bills back in the day, huh? It barely pays the bills now, probably.
No, it doesn't pay the bills, but it hopefully one day. And so I took a break. After doing it for a year. And then recently, probably about 4 years ago, I came back to it because, the time was right. I always wanted to come back to it on my own terms. And I was working as a political lobbyist for about 15 years. And 2 years ago, I kind of went out on my own. So I had a little more flexibility.
Wow.
So
you went out on your own as a lobbyist.
Yes.
Wow, you have some political chops, and so now you're your network and your political tools are just so sharp that you can work on your own and maybe set your hours so that you can party all night at the comic strip, huh? Make people laugh.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a point. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I
So,
mean, were you? It sounds like the last thing you probably want to talk about on stage is politics, because you kind of do that for a living. But are you using your savvy political knowledge to, I don't know, have a unique take on all these events that are coming fast and furious during this election season?
yeah, I mean, before I was very, I did shy away from doing anything political, especially New York City politics, because I do lobby mostly New York politicians.
Okay.
Um, but but I have started talking about it a little bit because I'm freelancing now, and and I never talked about my clients, um, but but definitely, I think, my journalism training and my political training, I think in ways I don't realize sometimes really comes in handy when I do stand up, because I do have a breadth of experience and a different perspective coming from the Midwest, working in politics, and even my journalism training, I think helps me communicate and articulate things, sometimes better and differently.
Yeah, yeah. Even I remember reading back in the day, all these even in journalism class, the writing was entirely different. You had to be very punchy, and they were very short paragraphs that slowly reveal information as you go on, and communicate simply, of course. And so, I mean, when developing a stand-up act, is that kind of what you do about your background? You kind of slowly reveal, the different layers of Jeannie Kim?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I mean, the journalism training, you always have to include who, what, when, where,
Yes.
and how. So I think that always comes into my mind when I think about how I need to communicate my bit. Um, and then I do, and absolutely, broadcast journalism is all about punchy writing. And I remember when I was in school, journalism was actually taken very seriously. I mean, which it's, mind-boggling right now. But I had to take journalism ethics. I had to take journalism law. We had long discussions in class about objectivity and journalism. All all of which now I think back on it, I go, wow,
Yeah, it's more
it
like
seems.
it's more like commentary now. And I guess nowadays, with the polar, one news site will have the right and one news site will have the left, but it's almost like a stand-up. Like they're giving people the news through their lens. And so, like, I suppose maybe Jeannie Kim has had to kind of relax the journalism standards to do this stuff on stage. But at the same time, you kind of are consistent with what's going on now, in that anything that comes out of your mouth is going to be distinctly Jeannie Kim, right?
Yes, absolutely. And over the years of doing it, I've become more feel like more free with my words, more uncensored, because being a lobbyist, you're not supposed to have opinions. You're just really selling your clients' opinions and stories. So yeah, so kind of breaking out of that, and even my background as a Korean, because everything's very insular and family oriented. So I think having that background um, really kind of makes you think about every single thing you're going to say.
Yeah.
But now, as I've been, doing comedy a lot more regularly, I feel, like I could just be more myself on stage. And even I never thought about what I did as lobbying as stand up, but I would stand on city hall steps and try to get politicians' attention by being quippy,
Yeah.
by saying something like a little funny, but just very naturally, but which is kind of what you do for stand up, but I never really thought about it back then. So, oh, there's like a ton of lobbyists, there's a ton of other politicians, other people trying to grab the politicians' attention. And I always had to find like a quick way to grab their attention in 30 seconds. And a lot of times it would be by saying something funny or quippy.
Wow. Because that makes you memorable. And is that the same thing? Like, you know, now with these outdoor comedy shows, sometimes they're on steps of these big, beautiful buildings like museums or whatever that can resemble the backdrop that is City Hall. Like, you know, are you in the same way that you're doing so with politicians? Are you cognizant of the fact that people's attention spans will really make a snap judgment about Jeannie Kim within the first couple jokes, and you make sure that your openers are that much better?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when we sent out videos for broadcast journalism, I mean, we were always taught that, you know, within the first 30 seconds, if you're not able to grab their attention, they're looking at the next tape.
Yeah.
Um, so if you're not able to grab their attention in one way or another in the first 30 seconds, the rest of your tape is pretty much a waste of time. So, so that does translate a lot to how comedy is. You have to have a strong A laugh opener. I mean, on stage, you know, you also have to have a strong closer. And if you don't have all A laughs, you can try out some of your newer stuff in the middle. But yeah, but it is a similar formula.
Yeah, and I guess you know, are you finding out that, you know, your experience back in the day where the scene wasn't as open to maybe women of color, like, is that changing quite a bit? Is comic strip great for that, or are you finding a welcoming scene in places like Brooklyn?
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, I was literally doing open mics, and there would be 50 white guys and me. Um, and sometimes there would be like one other woman, but not often. And definitely, I don't remember any people of color on the open mic scene. This was 20 years ago. Now the landscape is much, much different and better. Even though stand up is still, you know, more male dominated, there's still so much more diversity. And, you know, and more, you know, and in the old days, people didn't really expect women to be funny, and they found it kind of unnatural when a woman would tell jokes, because people had it in their heads that, you know, men are the joke tellers, like, you know, like in your family, like
Yeah.
it would be the dad or the uncles telling the jokes, and the women are supposed to kind of listen and, you know, laugh. So, so I think like there were a lot of factors that made, you know, made people think that, you know, women weren't natural joke tellers. And so that took some time to get used to. And I think social media has changed that a lot too, because now there's different venues, there's different outlets to share jokes, where in the old days, you really had to go through Johnny Carson. He was the only gatekeeper to
Yeah.
become a famous stand-up.
Yeah. And nowadays there's some, you know, great New York City comedians, and I follow, you know, all my former guests are just hilarious on Twitter, so I'm always retweeting. Is there things in your act today that you wouldn't have talked about 20 years ago when when the room was full of men open micers?
That's a good question. I always talked about my mom, because I always thought that she was the funniest person that I knew. Uh, Growing up, you know, we didn't have all those streaming services or the internet, so I really, like, you know, didn't have a ton of comic role models. But my mom was hysterical, and my grandma was hysterical. So I always talked about them. And and one time, even in the open mic room, one of the guys who were, you know, they all had like the same three topics that they talk about, like masturbating, pot smoking, how they couldn't get laid. And then I would get on stage after hearing, like, you know, a whole lineup of them, and start doing mom impressions. And one guy came and said, you know, there's already a Korean woman doing mom impressions. I said, who? Are they here in the room?
There's
And
20 of you guys talking about exactly the same thing, and you have the temerity to come up to me and tell me I'm doing something somebody else is doing.
yeah, and I looked at the room to see, I go, where is she? And I found out her they met Margaret Cho in the room. It's like, so, yeah, so it, so it was interesting, but I mean, I still talk about my mom now, but it's developed more, and I talk about my fiance, who's Italian, and has a very strong New York accent. So there's a ton of comedy that comes from living with who I call the Guido, and but I branched out a lot. I talk about growing up Korean, which was always, just being one of the few Asians in my town in Ohio. It was, a lot of times it was very difficult because people didn't understand like anything about Korean food, which has now become kind of trendy. And, I'm in New York City, so it's different. But, all of these things that I had to suppress and keep to myself and pretend I ate stovetop stuffing and that I didn't eat like, kimchi. Now I'm talking about it all. So in a lot of ways, it's very, it's very freeing to be able to talk about it.
Oh, good. And I imagine that people, firing up, let me get the name perfectly correctly, Gladys Comedy Party weekly. First of all, when's the next show? But can they expect other great female comedians like you or people of color?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We have a very diverse show, a lot of women, a lot of funny women, but a lot of just funny comics, period. Gladys, I think it was about 3 years ago that I met her, and she's a comedy legend in New York, very low key, but she's very, her style is like, tough love, and being, she'll tell you that you need to fix your hair, that you need to, wear a nicer shirt. But she really focuses on helping you become more organic on stage and bringing out who you are.
Good.
Versus like just the joke structure and how to, write a joke. And she's had people like Jim Gaffigan and Zach Galifianakis, a ton of people who have been under her tutelage, who have become successful. So everybody in our group has, I've been so proud of everybody. They're all improving every week, just getting funnier and developing their chops. So yeah, we have this show every Wednesday, 8 p.m. And it's about a 2-hour show. And at the end of the show, she always asks a question to the audience and the comics, like what was your worst dating experience? What's your guilty pleasure? And, we get some interesting answers out of it.
Well, I'm so glad that there's people like that, gatekeepers who are encouraging people to be organic, because there's only one Jeanie Kim. And of course, we follow her at Jeanie Kim Comedy on Instagram. So Jeanie Kim, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian.